Today, we're going to take a look at how to recover texture and tone information from a retouch that's been pushed a little bit too far. Okay, so what we have here is a final retouch image. It's a file that I sent out, and so when it comes back, it's going to be a flattened file. There's still some work that needs to be done, and so let's see what needs to be done. So let's mock this up. I'll create a blank layer, grab my brush, 100% flow, 100% opacity, and just take a look at what might need to be done. Looking at this eyebrow here, probably want to burn this down. So burn here. The hand is one of the main things that kind of jumps out. I'll need to match the tone, so a tonal match. There's some little spots in the hair, very quick fixes in here. And then probably this one area right here, I just want to blend those tones. So all of this stuff I can do with the information that I have with this flattened file, and it probably wouldn't take too long. But what I'd also like to do, if I can zoom in, is I'd like to recover some of the information that's been lost in the retouching process, mainly this texture here, as well as some of the areas that are maybe a little bit too smooth or a little bit too blended. I want to blend tones for my personal taste, but I still want them to be realistic. And so if we take a look, I'll delete these here. If we take a look at the original image, we can see, one, that there's been a lot of positive progress made, so I certainly don't want to start over. But we can also see that there's been a lot of texture that's been lost in that process, as well as some tonal areas that are a little bit too much. So tonal-wise, this transition here, this area here is a little bit too flat. This area here is flat. And some of this in here is a little bit flat. So I want to bring some of the original tone back, and I also want to bring texture back in these areas as well. So how can I do that? Well, that information as far as this layer goes is gone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow texture from the original file itself. And I'm going to be using frequency separation to do this. I'll run a frequency separation on both of these files, and then I'll take the texture and the tone from the original layer, the original file, and its frequency separation, and I will borrow them and use them in my retouched frequency separation. Now, I am working with the assumption that you have some experience with frequency separation. If you haven't heard that term or if you haven't used this process, I would recommend that you research it a little bit. There's a ton of information out there on the subject. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, I'm going to do the frequency separation on the original. So I'm going to hold down Option and drag this up. I'm creating a copy of that. You can see the double arrow, and Command J to create a copy of that. And I'm going to rename this SOOC low and this SOOC high. And what I am effectively doing when I run this frequency separation, or anytime you do it, is you are splitting your file or your layer in half. You are sending a certain percentage of the information down into the tone and a certain information up into the texture. And how much is sent down and how much is sent up is decided by your blur. I'm going to use a Gaussian blur. For my file, I'm going to use a radius of 8. Depending on the size of your image, you may have to adjust the radius. So I'll hit OK. And then I'll choose my high, and I'll go into Image, Apply Image. I want to target the low, add, invert, scale of 2, hit OK. And the blending mode is going to be linear light. And you can see basically that there's been no change, but I have split this up into tone and texture. So I'll group these, Shift click, Command G, and I'll name this SOOC frequency. And then I'll do the same thing with the retouch layer. Option click that to create a copy, Command J to create another copy. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit Command F. That is going to have whatever filter I ran last is saved here in the Command F shortcut. So Command F to get the same exact blur. I need the frequency separations to match. Need them to be identical from one to the other. And Let's name these Retouch Low, Retouch High, and then, or HIG, Image, Apply Image, and I want to choose the Retouch Low layer, invert, add scale of 2, hit OK. Once again, I changed the blending mode to linear light. I'm going to add a layer in between just out of habit. I probably won't need it or use it. And then group these, Command G, and this will be Retouch Frequency. All right, and so this is where I'm going to do all of my work. This is actually, I'm just going to borrow information here. So what do I have here is the original texture and the original tone. And so first I'll work on the texture. I'm going to option click and bring this up here. And then I'm going to clip the original texture to the new texture. So I'll hold down option, hover in between the two layers. So now this only affects this layer. It's only visible where this is visible. Change the blending mode back to normal because this is already doing the blending for us. And now what we can see is the retouched file or image with all of the original texture. And I don't want all of the texture. I'm actually going to mask this out and then paint it back in. So hold down option, click on my mask to get a blank mask, and you can see that it's gone or it's been hidden. As I'm working, I'm going to press shift on my mask anytime I want to see all of that original texture. And I'm going to paint this in. So grab a brush, soft brush actually. Normally with texture we're working with hard brushes, but since I'm painting this in on the mask, not directly affecting the texture, then this is going to work fine. And also I'm not going to paint it all back in. I'm going to kind of build it up so that it's stronger towards the front of the face and kind of fades out almost like a natural out of focus look. A natural soft focus. So let's paint this in. All right, so white is going to paint in. Just adding some of that texture. Now again, when I'm doing this, I'm going to add texture. I'm going to gain information back. But I'm also, like I was saying earlier, going to take some steps backwards in that there's going to be some stuff like these hairs that are popping back up that are actually going to be problem areas. So while I'm solving one problem, I'm also creating another problem. But that's okay. That at least gives me the option of going in and fixing that and having that information that would otherwise be lost. So painting some of this texture back in the areas that I want them. A little bit here on the lip, but not too much. Some of those hairs we don't want back. Underneath here. A little bit in this area. Let's shift on and off. A little bit here. A little bit on the lips. Again, on and off. So we can see we're bringing back in a lot of that texture that we've lost. Really want to focus on the front of and the center of the face. Zoom out. A little bit here. Okay. All right, so I think that's looking good. And we can see this is what our mask looks like. This is before and after. Zooming in. Before and after. We'll still have to go back in afterwards and fix some of these larger pores. But that's not a hard fix. I'll also have to address a lot of this hair in my actual retouching. I might bring some of that out here, just paint it in black. But I don't want to lose all that texture that I've just gained, so I'll stop there. Okay, so that's looking good. One more pass, adding. Okay. All right, so that's better. And now I want to bring in some of that tone or correct some of the areas that are a little bit too smooth. So I'm going to go into my SOOC low. Option, click that up on top of the retouch low. It's going to be a drastic difference all of a sudden because it's bringing back in all of that original information. I certainly don't want to do that, so I'm going to option click on that mask again to hide it. Grab my brush tool, and this time I'm going to go opacity 100% and the flow down to about 2%. There we go. And I'm just going to paint back in wherever it looks a little bit unnatural. So under here, right here where it's a little bit flat. So these areas where it's starting to look a little bit flat, I just want to bring some of that information back in. This transition a little bit, but not too much. So more under the eyes, a little bit here, but mostly in these areas. And let's see before and after. Zoom out. So just bringing in some of that natural look. So a little bit more under here. And we're almost done. A lot in here. I'm going to hit X to flip back to black and paint out a little bit in here. So before and after, before and after. So a little bit more of a natural look. Get underneath that eye. Good. All right, so we're pretty much done with this step. Now there's still retouching to be done, but we have added that texture back in. We have fixed the areas that were too smooth, and if we take a look, we can see our original retouched image and then the information that's been recovered. So the tonal information as well as the texture information. So pretty big difference when we zoom in. And now I can actually start retouching. So Command-Shift-N, create a new layer. Command-Shift-Option-E to create a stamp visible so that I have a flattened copy of that. And then layer, duplicate layer. I'm going to do all of my retouching in a separate file. So copy this layer, new, hit OK. And now I can actually begin retouching. In a following video, we'll have a speed retouch so you can see this image in its finished state.